Daniel Cross had lived on New Terra Station for 18 months without incident. His days followed comfortable rhythms: work at the data security firm, meals at the same 3 restaurants, sleep in his small but adequate residential unit. Life was predictable in ways that Daniel had learned to appreciate after too many years of frontier instability. That predictability shattered the moment he found her waiting outside his apartment. She stood in the corridor with an eerie stillness that immediately triggered his threat assessment training. But she wasn't doing anything overtly dangerous, just standing there, watching the lift doors with an expression of focused patience. When Daniel approached his door, she turned, and he got his first clear look at her. She was humanoid but undeniably alien. Skin pale enough to seem almost translucent, with veins that traced delicate patterns beneath the surface. Eyes that gleamed with inner light, amber shading toward crimson, and pupils that were slightly too large, suggesting adaptation to low-light environments. Long ears swept back from her head in elegant curves, decorated with silver rings that caught the corridor's ambient lighting. And when she smiled at seeing him, her canines were distinctly elongated, not grotesquely so, but enough to register as predatory. "Hello, Daniel," she said, and her voice carried warmth that suggested they'd known each other for years. "I've been searching for you for so long." Daniel's hand moved automatically toward his comm unit, ready to call station security. "I think you have the wrong person." Daniel Matthew Cross, born in Chicago, Earth, 34 standard years old, currently employed by Sentinel Data Solutions as a security consultant. She recited the facts without hostility, just stating information. "You don't remember me. I was afraid of that." "I definitely don't know you." Daniel kept his distance, assessing exits. The corridor was public enough that she probably wouldn't try anything violent, but something about her presence set off instincts he'd learned to trust. "My name is Celara Vinecresh." She reached slowly into her jacket, giving him time to see the movement was non-threatening, and produced a small object. "And 3 years ago on Helix 7 station, you gave me this." She held out what looked like a marriage token, a crystalline object that bore genetic authentication markers. Even from a distance, Daniel could see his own signature encoded in the matrix. "That's impossible," he said flatly. "I've never been to Helix 7, and I'm definitely not married." "You were there for 6 months on security consultation." Celara's luminescent eyes held his, and her expression carried grief that felt too genuine to fake. "And we did marry, in the Cravathi way. You promised you would never forget me." The Cravathi. Daniel searched his memory for the reference. The vampire species. "We prefer bioelectric symbiotes, but yes, that's the common term." Her tone held dry humor. "And before you panic, I'm not here to drain your blood or whatever human mythology suggests. I'm here because you're my husband, and I've spent 3 years trying to find you." Daniel's comm unit was active now, ready to call security with a single command. But something made him hesitate. "If we're married, why don't I remember you?" "Because when you were evacuated from Helix 7 after the Raider attack, someone decided that your bond with me was a security concern. They wiped your memories of our time together." Her voice carried anger beneath careful control. "They erased me from your mind and made sure I couldn't find you. But I'm Cravathi. We're very good at finding what we've lost." "This is insane," Daniel said, but even as he spoke, doubt crept in. There were gaps in his memories from 3 years ago, periods he'd attributed to medical treatment after what he'd been told was an accident. "I would remember being married." "Would you?" Celara took a step closer, moving with that fluid grace that suggested predatory awareness. "If someone had erased every memory of me, every moment we shared, every choice you made to be with me, would you remember? Or would there just be a gap you couldn't quite explain?" Daniel's mind raced through his timeline from 3 years ago. There were gaps, bigger than he'd realized when he'd never had reason to question them. Medical records that were curiously sparse, transfer orders that didn't align perfectly with his memory of events. "I want proof," he said finally. "Real proof, not just a token that could have been faked." "I have proof." Celara's expression softened. 3 years' worth of recorded messages, images, documents, evidence of a conspiracy to separate bonded pairs of humans and Cravathi. And a bond that still exists between us, dormant but intact, if you're willing to feel for it. "I'm not feeling anything." She moved quickly, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. Her hand touched his, just a brief contact, but Daniel felt something he couldn't explain. A jolt that wasn't quite physical, a recognition that bypassed conscious thought, like his nervous system remembered what his mind had forgotten. He jerked his hand back, pulse racing. "What did you do?" "Nothing." Her voice carried sadness now. "That was just an echo of the bond we formed, a connection that someone tried to erase but couldn't fully destroy." She stepped back, giving him space. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm asking you to listen, to look at the evidence, to at least consider that what I'm telling you is true." Daniel looked at this woman, this alien with predatory grace and eyes that burned with something that looked like love, and tried to reconcile the impossibility of her claims with the nagging feeling that something about her presence felt familiar. "If I agree to hear you out," he said slowly, "we do it in public, with records, where I can call for help if this is some kind of setup." "Of course." Celara's smile was sad but genuine. "I don't expect trust, not yet. But I've waited 3 years to find you, Daniel. I can wait a little longer for you to remember what we had." She turned and walked away, moving with that unnerving fluidity, and called back without looking. "There's an observation lounge on level 7. I'll be there tomorrow at 1400 hours. If you decide you want answers, come find me." Then she was gone, disappearing into the station's crowds with the ease of someone who knew how to become invisible. Daniel stood in the corridor, staring at his hand where she'd touched him, feeling phantom echoes of something that shouldn't exist. That night, he pulled his medical records from 3 years ago and started reading them with the attention to detail that had made him valuable in security work. And slowly, he began to see the gaps. The observation lounge was crowded with residents enjoying New Terra's view of the Cygnus Nebula, a popular social space where privacy was impossible and witnesses were abundant. Daniel had chosen it deliberately, wanting public safety even as he pursued dangerous questions. Celara sat at a corner table, 2 cups of something steaming beside her. She dressed more casually today, simple clothes that didn't draw attention, but she still moved with that predatory grace that made heads turn. "You came," she said as Daniel approached, genuine relief in her voice. "I wasn't certain you would." I pulled my medical records. Daniel sat across from her, not accepting the offered drink. "There are gaps, inconsistencies, things that don't quite add up. That's how they hide it." Celara pushed a data tablet across the table. "This contains everything I've gathered over 3 years, recorded conversations between us, images from our time together, evidence of the program that targeted bonded pairs, documentation of what they did to you." Daniel activated the tablet and found himself looking at an image he didn't remember existing. Himself and Celara, standing together in what looked like a residential unit, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling with the ease of people comfortable in each other's presence. He stared at the image, searching for any sense of recognition. Nothing came. "Tell me about the Cravathi," he said, setting the tablet aside. "If we're going to do this, I need to understand what you are." Celara nodded, as if she'd expected this question. "We're an ancient species. Humanoid, obviously, but our evolution took a different path. We developed the ability to sustain ourselves through bioelectric energy, life force, if you want to call it that. We require contact with other living beings to maintain our own biological systems." "So you're parasites." "We're symbiotes," she corrected gently. "The energy exchange is mutual and consensual." In return for what we draw, we provide enhanced regeneration, extended lifespan, heightened awareness. Our bonded partners don't lose, they gain. And we were bonded, this supposed marriage. Yes, the Cravathi bond is more than a legal contract. It's a physiological connection that links our bioelectric signatures. When done properly, with consent and intention, it creates a partnership that most species can barely comprehend. Her luminescent eyes held his. You chose it, Daniel, freely. After 36 hours trapped together during a station crisis, after weeks of growing closer, you asked for the bonding ritual. Daniel pulled up more files on the tablet, recorded messages in his own voice, saying things he didn't remember saying. Planning a future with someone he didn't remember meeting. 3 years ago I was on Helix 7, Selara continued. Diplomatic assignment from my people, establishing cultural exchange protocols. You were there on security consultation. The station had issues with smuggling operations. We met during an environmental systems failure that trapped us in a sealed section for over a day. I don't remember any of that. I know, her voice carried pain. They made sure you wouldn't, but I remember. I remember how you kept me talking during those hours, how you shared stories about growing up on Earth, how you looked at me, really looked at me, and didn't see a monster but a person. She paused. Do you know how rare that is, Daniel? For someone to meet a Cravathi and see past the predator mythology. Daniel scrolled through more files, feeling disconnected from the evidence before him. So we bonded, got married. Then what? 3 weeks later, Helix 7 was attacked by raiders. Opportunists taking advantage of the station's weak security. You were injured protecting me, plasma burn to the chest, neural damage from the blast. You were evacuated to a human medical facility, and I was separated from you in the chaos. And when you tried to find me, you'd vanished. No records of transfer, no patient files I could access, nothing. It took me 6 months to even confirm you'd survived. Her hands tightened around her cup. When I finally tracked you down, you'd been relocated here, with new employment records and a cover story about recovering from an accident. All your memories of me had been erased. Daniel sat back, studying her face for signs of deception. Why would anyone do that? Because bonded pairs of humans and Cravathi scared certain factions in your government. She pulled up another file, classified documents with heavy redaction. There's a program, unofficial, black budget, designed to identify bonded pairs and separate them. The reasoning is that the bonds create divided loyalties, potential security risks. Humans connected to Cravathi might prioritize their partners over human interests. So they just erase people's memories. That's illegal, unethical, and completely deniable. Selara's tone carried bitter familiarity. The memory wipes are hidden under legitimate medical treatments, neural repair for trauma injuries, PTSD protocols, perfectly reasonable treatments that just happen to target specific memories. Daniel wanted to reject it all as paranoid fantasy, but he'd worked in security long enough to know that governments did terrible things they could justify as necessary. Even if I believe all this, he said slowly, I still don't remember you. How do I know I'm not being manipulated now? False evidence, fake memories implanted. You don't, Selara met his eyes. You have every reason to doubt me, but I can prove the bond exists, if you're willing to try. How? The Cravathi bond operates on bioelectric frequencies. Even dormant, even suppressed by memory wipes, it leaves traces. Physical responses your conscious mind doesn't control. She extended her hand across the table. Let me touch you, not just briefly this time, but sustained contact. You'll feel the connection. And then you can decide if you think I'm lying. Daniel looked at her outstretched hand, pale skin with those visible veins, fingers long and elegant. Everything in his training said not to trust this. But 3 years of gaps in his memory said maybe he should. He reached out and took her hand. The sensation was immediate and undeniable, warmth spreading from the point of contact, a tingling awareness that traveled up his arm and settled somewhere behind his sternum. It felt like recognition, like his nervous system responding to something familiar even though his conscious mind registered only strangeness. Selara's eyes brightened, their luminescence intensifying. There. Do you feel it? That's the bond, Daniel, dormant but intact, waiting for both of us to acknowledge it. He did feel it, and that terrified him more than anything she'd said. He pulled his hand back, breaking the contact, and the sensation faded but didn't disappear entirely, like phantom limb syndrome, something that should be there but wasn't quite tangible. I need time, he said, his voice rougher than intended. Time to process this, to investigate on my own. Of course. Selara didn't reach for him again, respecting the boundary. Take whatever time you need. I've waited 3 years. I can wait longer. She stood to leave, then paused. Daniel, whether you ever remember me or not, I need you to know what we had was real, and I will never regret bonding with you, even knowing what it cost us. Then she was gone, leaving Daniel alone with a tablet full of impossible evidence and a feeling in his chest that shouldn't exist but absolutely did. He spent the rest of the day diving into investigation, using every resource his security clearance provided. And slowly, piece by piece, he uncovered evidence that supported Selara's claims. The conspiracy was real. The memory wipes had happened. And somewhere in his suppressed memories, buried beneath 3 years of manufactured amnesia, was a truth that someone had decided he shouldn't be allowed to access. The question was whether he wanted to reclaim it. 2 weeks of investigation confirmed what Daniel had been afraid to accept. Selara was telling the truth. He'd found the evidence buried in classified files he probably shouldn't have been able to access. Documentation of a program called Project Severance, designed to identify and separate compromised, bonded pairs. His name appeared in the files, along with treatment records showing memory modification protocols disguised as neural trauma repair. Someone had decided his bond with Selara was a security risk. Someone had erased her from his memory. Someone had stolen 3 years of his life. The violation burned worse than any physical injury. He met Selara again, this time in his own apartment, privacy finally feeling more important than public safety. I found the evidence, he said when she arrived. Project Severance, the authorization for memory modification, all of it. Selara's ears flattened, a Cravathi expression of pain. I'm sorry you had to discover it this way. I wanted to spare you that violation. You can't spare me what's already been done. Daniel paced his small living space, anger and confusion warring in his chest. They stole my memories, my choices. 3 years of my life were built on a foundation of manufactured ignorance. I know, her voice was quiet, and I can't give that back to you, no one can. But you said the Cravathi have techniques for restoring damaged bonds. Ways to recover suppressed memories. He stopped pacing, facing her. Is that true? Yes, but it's not simple or quick, and it requires your willing participation and trust. Selara moved closer, cautious. I would need to establish a temporary deep connection. Nothing permanent unless you chose to make it so. That could trigger the dormant memories. Help your brain access what's been suppressed. Would it work? I don't know. Memory restoration is unpredictable. You might recover everything. You might recover fragments. You might remember the events but not the emotions associated with them. She met his eyes. And you might remember and discover that the person you were then isn't who you are now. That 3 years have changed you too much to reclaim what we had. Daniel considered that possibility. What if I do this and discover I don't want the bond anymore? That whoever I was when I married you isn't who I am now? Pain flickered across Selara's face, but her voice remained steady. Then I'll accept that. I didn't search for 3 years to trap you in a bond you don't want. I searched because I needed to know you were alive and to give you the choice that was taken from you. She paused. If you remember and choose to end our bond, I'll honor that, even though it will hurt. And if I choose not to try restoration at all, to just move forward without recovering those memories. Then I'll accept that too. Her luminescent eyes held his. You owe me nothing, Daniel. Not memory, not obligation, not love. The bond was formed with free choice. It should only continue with free choice. Daniel looked at this woman, his alleged wife, whom he couldn't remember loving, and tried to untangle his conflicting impulses. Logic said the smart move was to walk away, to build his life on what he knew rather than chase memories that might not exist anymore. But that feeling in his chest when she touched him suggested there was something real beneath the manufactured forgetting, something worth recovering. If I agree to try this, he said slowly, what does it involve? Multiple sessions conducted in private. I would establish bioelectric contact, sustained, deeper than what we've done so far, and guide your neural pathways toward the suppressed memories. It's not comfortable. Recovering buried trauma rarely is. When could we start? Hope flickered across Celara's face, quickly suppressed. Whenever you're ready, tonight if you want, or we can wait until you've had more time to prepare. Daniel looked around his apartment, the space he'd built a life in, predictable and safe. Then he looked at Celara with her predatory grace and eyes that burned with something that claimed to be love. Let's start now, he said, before I lose my nerve. The process was intimate in ways Daniel hadn't anticipated. Celara had him lie on his couch while she knelt beside him, one hand resting on his chest over his heart, the other touching his forehead. Close your eyes, she said softly, and try to open yourself to the connection. Don't force it, just allow it. He felt the bioelectric pulse strengthen, warmth spreading from her hands through his body. It was uncomfortable but not painful, like stretching muscles that had been immobile too long. Focus on the feeling. Celara's voice seemed to come from very close and very far away simultaneously. Don't chase specific memories. Just let yourself feel what's beneath the surface. At first there was nothing but the physical sensation. Then fragments began to emerge, not full memories but impressions, feelings without context, safety, warmth, laughter. The sensation of someone's hand in his, a voice saying his name with affection. The fragments were frustratingly incomplete, like trying to remember a dream that was already fading. But they were there, evidence that beneath the manufactured forgetting, something real remained. The first session lasted an hour and left Daniel exhausted, with a headache that felt like his brain was reorganizing itself. Celara looked equally drained, her luminescence dimmed. That's enough for today, she said quietly. Your neural pathways need time to adjust to what we're accessing. Did it work? Daniel asked, though he could feel that something had shifted. Partially, you're starting to touch the suppressed memories, but full restoration will take time, multiple sessions, patience. She stood to leave, moving with less than her usual grace. The connection had clearly taken energy from her too. Rest tonight. Tomorrow try to notice if anything feels different. If dreams surface, write them down. The memories often return in fragments before they coalesce. After she left, Daniel lay on his couch, feeling the phantom warmth where her hands had been. His mind felt unsettled, like a computer running a background process he couldn't quite identify. That night, he dreamed of amber eyes and a laugh he recognized but couldn't place. The restoration sessions continued over 3 weeks, each one penetrating deeper into the suppressed memories. Daniel began to recover fragments that felt more substantial, not just emotions but actual moments. He remembered being trapped during the station crisis, the fear of suffocating as environmental systems failed. And he remembered a voice cutting through the panic, calm and steady. Breathe with me. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. We're going to be fine. He remembered looking at the woman beside him in the darkness, seeing her bioluminescent eyes providing the only light, and thinking that if he had to be trapped anywhere, at least he wasn't alone. He remembered talking through those 36 hours, sharing stories about their vastly different childhoods, discovering unexpected common ground in humor and curiosity. learning that beneath the predatory appearance was someone who valued knowledge, who cared deeply about her people's place in the galactic community, who had spent her life navigating the fear and suspicion that vampire mythology created. He remembered the moment when she'd shared her life force to keep him warm as the station's temperature dropped, the first bioelectric connection between them, tentative and necessary. The sensation of her energy flowing into him and the shocking intimacy of it. "I've never done this with a human before," she'd admitted. "I wasn't sure it would work." "Is it supposed to feel like this?" He'd asked because the connection felt like more than simple energy exchange. "No," she'd said quietly. "This is different, deeper than it should be." He remembered the weeks after the crisis, when they'd continued seeing each other despite the logical reasons not to. The way she'd taught him about Cravathi culture, and he'd shared human customs with her. The careful courtship as they'd navigated two species worth of social expectations and personal baggage. He remembered the night he'd asked about bonding rituals, wanting to understand what it would mean to formalize their connection in the Cravathi way. "It's permanent," she told him, "or as permanent as anything can be. The bond creates a connection that lasts until death. Breaking it is not impossible but extremely painful and damaging to both parties." "That sounds serious," he'd said. "It is. Which is why I need you to be certain before we even consider it." Her luminescent eyes had held his with absolute focus. "I won't bond with you unless you're sure, Daniel. No doubts, no reservations." He remembered being sure, absolutely certain that this woman, this alien who'd met him in crisis and stayed through everything after, was someone he wanted to build a life with. He remembered the bonding ritual itself, conducted in private with only the two of them present. The exchange of vows in both their languages. The sensation of their bioelectric signatures intertwining, creating something that was neither entirely him nor entirely her, but a third thing that belonged to both. The feeling of completion, like finding a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. And he remembered 3 weeks of partnership, learning to navigate the bond's new intimacy, making plans for a future that would require navigating two cultures and probably dealing with prejudice from both sides. He remembered believing it was worth it. The attack on Helix 7 came back in flashes, raiders breaching station security, civilians panicking, the emergency evacuation protocols that always worked too slowly. He remembered trying to protect Solara, remembered the plasma blast that had caught him in the chest, remembered pain and darkness, and her voice saying his name with desperate urgency. And then nothing until he'd woken in a medical facility with doctors telling him he'd been in an accident and was lucky to be alive. No mention of Solara, no memory of why he'd been on Helix 7. Just gaps where something important should have been. The memories returned with overwhelming force during the final restoration session, 3 weeks after they'd started. Daniel lay on his couch with Solara's hands creating that familiar bioelectric bridge, and suddenly the fragments coalesced into complete recollection. He remembered loving her. The emotion hit him like physical impact, 3 years of suppressed feeling condensed into a few shattering moments of recovered awareness. He remembered how she'd made him laugh during that terrifying crisis, how she'd looked at him with wonder when he'd asked about bonding, how she'd whispered his name during their wedding vows with a reverence that had made his throat tight. He remembered the bond settling into place like coming home, and he remembered having all of it stolen from him. When the session ended and Solara withdrew the connection, Daniel found tears on his face. She looked stricken, clearly uncertain whether to comfort him or give him space. "I remember," he said, his voice raw. "Everything. I remember you, us, what we had." Relief and fear warred in her expression. "And how does that feel?" "Like someone reached into my chest and tore out my heart 3 years ago, and I've been walking around not even knowing it was missing." He sat up facing her. "I loved you, I chose you, and someone decided that didn't matter." "Daniel." "No, let me finish." He took her hands, feeling the bioelectric pulse strengthen with the contact, recognition now, not just reaction. I remember loving you, and I'm angry, so angry at what was done to us. 3 years we lost, 3 years they stole. I know, she said quietly, but I also need you to understand something. He met her luminescent eyes. The person who loved you 3 years ago, I remember being him. I remember what he felt. But I'm not entirely that person anymore. 3 years have changed me. Experiences I had without you shaped me differently than I would have been if we'd stayed together. Solara's ears flattened pain. I understand if you need to end the bond. I don't want to end it. Daniel tightened his grip on her hands. But I also can't just pick up where we left off. We need to rebuild this. Consciously. With full awareness of who we both are now, not just who we were then. Hope flickered across her face. What are you saying? I'm saying I remember loving you. And I think I could love you again, or maybe I never stopped. Maybe it was just buried. But we need time. We need to learn each other again. He paused. Is that something you're willing to do? Start over in a way while keeping the bond? Solara's answer came through tears she didn't bother hiding. Yes. Yes, I'll do whatever you need, whatever this requires. Then we start there, Daniel said. Not as strangers, but not as the couple we were 3 years ago either. As two people who have to rebuild what was stolen from them. She nodded, and he pulled her into an embrace that felt simultaneously foreign and deeply familiar. The bioelectric bond pulsed between them, recognition, relief, a promise of what could be rebuilt with patience and intention. Over the following months, they built a new foundation from the fragments of what they'd lost. Daniel had to reconcile his recovered memories with the life he'd lived without them. A strange double consciousness of remembering both the marriage he'd forgotten and the 3 years he'd lived as if it had never existed. They also pursued justice. Work larger than Daniel's old apartment, decorated with a blend of human and Cravathi aesthetics that reflected their merged lives. Do you regret it? Daniel asked, watching ships arrive and depart through their window. 3 years searching for someone who didn't remember you. Solara moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his with the ease of long practice. I regret what was done to us. I regret the time we lost. But I don't regret finding you. Even if you'd chosen to remain without memories, I needed to know you were alive. I'm not the same person I was, Daniel admitted. There are still gaps, memories that didn't fully return. Ways I changed during those 3 years that can't be undone. Then we'll be imperfect together. Solara squeezed his hand, and the bioelectric pulse strengthened, their bond reasserting itself through conscious choice rather than just recovered memory. We don't need to be who we were. We just need to choose each other now. Daniel pulled her close, feeling the bond settle into place with growing familiarity. It wasn't the same as it had been 3 years ago. It was deeper in some ways, harder one, built on conscious choice rather than just initial attraction. I choose you, he said quietly, again every day. And I choose you, Solara whispered against his chest, for as long as you'll have me. Outside their window, the station continued its eternal rotation, hosting thousands of beings navigating the complicated terrain of cross-cultural existence. Among them, a human man and a Cravathi woman proved that even bonds broken by betrayal could be restored, not to their original form, but to something new and perhaps stronger for having survived. The vampiric grace that had first terrified Daniel now registered as beautiful, familiar home. Solara was his wife, not just because recovered memories said so, but because they'd chosen to make it true again, day by day, choice by conscious choice. And in a galaxy where memory could be stolen and identities erased, perhaps the most powerful form of resistance was the stubborn insistence on loving someone even after everything had been done to make you forget they existed. Years later, when others asked how they'd survived the separation and memory wipe, Daniel always gave the same answer. We remembered what mattered, not in our heads at first, but in the bond itself, in the connection that someone tried to erase but couldn't fully destroy. And then we chose to rebuild what was stolen, one day at a time. Solara would add, The bond gave us a foundation, but the conscious choice to honor it, that's what actually saved us. And holding hands, bioelectric pulses synchronized. They embodied a simple truth. That love strong enough to survive theft, loss, and manufactured forgetting is love worth fighting for. Even when the fight is just the daily choice to remember, to rebuild, to refuse to let cruelty have the final word. The human and the vampire, the stolen bond restored. A legend of determination that spread across dozens of worlds, inspiring others to fight for connections that systems of power had declared too dangerous to allow. And in their quarters,